So in this lecture, I'm going to talk about renewable energy. And you'll remember that we spent a great deal of time early on in this quarter talking about what energy is. And so energy is the ability to do work. And we have different types of energy. So for example, we have energy that could be chemical energy. So for example, the carbon that is found within plants and the sugars, those are examples of chemical energy that we use in order to power our metabolism. So that's chemical energy. We also have mechanical energy. So that is like physically moving something. So if we talk about a windmill, for example, the air is moving the turbines, right? And that is an example of mechanical energy. And what is that mechanical energy being turned into? It is being turned into electrical energy. So electrical energy is the movement of electrons, and that movement is actually a type of mechanical, but that movement is what powers our, say, for example, most of our devices that we own, that electrical energy. When we talk about the mechanical and the chemical and the electrical energy, we could talk about ultimately, where do we get most of our energy for the powering of our ecosystems? It would be solar energy. And this is actually a type of electromagnetic energy. Right? And so like if you took a physics class, you would talk about these different types of energies, and solar energy is very interesting because we have these photons, maybe perhaps packets of energy that are being given off by our sun. And then that energy is used by plants to produce chemical energy by extracting carbon out of the atmosphere. So this is solar energy. And then we could also talk about heat. And what is heat? But this is molecular movement. So physics is very interesting because it talks about how heat flows. So when we, say, for example, are laying out in the sun, that energy, that sunlight, is being transferred into and creating heat energy, and it is actually speeding up the movement of our molecules. So cold does not move in the other direction, but heat moves, and it's a very interesting when that energy will move from more movement to less movement. So for example, your coffee cup will dissipate heat over time because energy is moving from the molecules that are moving inside your coffee. They're being transferred out to the molecules. You might even be able to put your hand around a coffee cup and feel the air molecules are starting to speed up. And so that is an example of heat energy. So fundamentally, most of our sources of energy on this planet are from the sun, but we also have the energy that is from the inside of our planet. So we have a molten core, and there's chemical reactions, nuclear reactions occurring inside of our planet. And so like, for example, the molten lava that comes out of volcanoes is because of those chemical reactions that are taking place at the core of our planet. So that would also be a source of energy. So if we look at how we could use, so these actually are not all renewable, because we talked about fossil fuels and that would be chemical, and that's not a renewable. So these are just the types of energy, kind of a review. So we could talk then about what are some sources of renewable energy. So this is our types of energy. So for your renewable energy, we could talk about biomass. And maybe biomass is not always renewable, but this would be like things like wood, right? Do we have a source of plants that grow that we could use and extract energy of them from. So for example, when you heat your house with a wood stove, you are using biomass energy. That's not fossil fuels, that is biomass energy. Oftentimes our forests do not grow as fast as we would need them to supply us with a constant amount of biomass energy. And that would be particularly a problem, say, for example, if you lived in a very dense place and maybe even on an island, right? We talked about Easter Island, but even places like Japan, right? They have a problem. They just do not have biomass. They do not have the land. They have a lot of people. So biomass is not necessarily. But we could also talk about, say, for example, ethanol from corn. Maybe you've heard of biodiesel. One of the problems with growing crops for ethanol, however, is that they sometimes are energetically intensive, right? So we might have to use fertilizers, we have to use water, we have to use machinery that runs on fossil fuels, maybe. And so perhaps biodiesel is not necessarily as sustainable as we would like it to be. Okay, so remember the idea of sustainability is that it is being generated faster than it is being depleted. Okay, so then we could talk about, say, for example, wind energy. Is that something that we use up? No, right? So wind energy would be truly renewable. So we'll put, I'll put most likely not. Most likely not very renewable, right? Unless you're very good at managing your forestry, for example. Okay, so we have wind energy. So we have turbines. Now, again, there's costs implied in like the construction of them, right? So we have to take into consideration all the hidden costs of them. And a lot of people are concerned about the land that they take up and if they are doing harm to the natural ecosystems, and are they doing harm to birds, for example. So wind energy is an example of renewable. Where does that energy come from? That comes from solar energy, right? So wind energy is actually solar energy that has been converted to the movement of air. Right? So solar energy is another one. We also have, interestingly, what about tidal energy? You ever stood on the Oregon coast and watched the tides and the currents come in? You think, man, that is a lot of energy out there, right? So the waves coming in. So there has been technology that you can put out into the ocean, and as the waves come in, it can it can turn something, maybe turned into mechanical and then into electrical energy. So tidal energy is very interesting using that. We also have hydro energy, that's water, and we talked about this in terms of dams. So if we dam the water and then we release the water and it spins the turbines, then it can generate electricity. Now, hydropower or hydro energy has gotten a lot of criticism because it damages the entire ecosystem of the rivers and has decimated fish populations, migratory fish populations like lamprey and salmon, for example. And so there's a lot of controversy over using hydro energy or hydropower. And then we could talk about geothermal energy. So you might hear of people that have a heat pump, and they might take water that is coming up from the earth that is of a warmer temperature or cooler in the summer, and they could use that water that is coming from the underground to help to either warm or cool their house. And this is a good source. Those heat pumps are good, but they do use water. And so oftentimes water is then just released, like maybe just out. If you have geothermal energy, and you're living outside of town, maybe that water just gets dumped somewhere off away from your house. And so you're actually using up some of that precious groundwater that is drinkable, right, and clean. So, we got to talk about the other problem with energy is how does it affect our supply of clean water? So I would talk about these as examples of renewable energy in your essay questions that are related to this topic.